and the Gnostics, who were an ancient group of, you could say, thinkers. Some of the early Christians actually were Gnostics. Before Christianity was adopted by the Roman Empire, it was actually quite diverse because there was no heavy political pressure forcing everyone to exactly agree. And so you find many, many different communities with many different points of view. And sometimes these points of view pop up in the modern world because a new text is discovered, some new gospel is discovered, and so on. But it was quite diverse. And of course the winners declared all the losers to be heretics. Anyway, that's a different story. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is talking about worldview, how you see the world. There are basically two ways that we function cognitively in a very general sense. And that is, we have to identify all kinds of different objects, like, for example, your hand and your head, or your foot, or someone else's head, or the floor, the ceiling, the window. Or, for example, I'm speaking, and although, since most of you probably are native English speakers, probably you're not engaged in any type of grammatical analysis of what I'm saying, you're just naturally understanding it. But actually, if you do analyze what I'm saying, or what you're saying, what any normal English speaker is saying, it's actually extremely complex and sophisticated, involving parts of speech and syntax, which means word order, semantics, shades of meanings, and all kinds of other things. So, your brain is identifying different parts of speech and different words and their meanings, and it's identifying, for example, your space where you're sitting and somebody else's space. So you're making all kinds of, actually, at every moment you're making thousands of distinctions that are somewhat unconscious because they're so normal and natural. But at the same time that we analytically make all those distinctions, we also have to have the capacity to put it all together into one big seamless picture. So you're just here now. It's just one simple experience of being here now. And so these two functions in Sanskrit, they're called samasa and vyasa, which means putting it all together and taking it all apart. And so we're doing those two things right now, and that's why we are, relatively sane. And all of us are experiencing. Another thing I want to say quickly, actually what I should have said before, and I apologize, I should have thanked Sri Keshava, who's been my student for many years, and we're old friends, and she sings beautifully, so I want to thank her for that. Another thing about objectivity and subjectivity, I don't know if you are aware of it, keep up with the latest postmodern nonsense, but there has been a kind of war on objectivity. The idea that everyone has their point of view, and it would be very rude to think that anyone else's point of view is better than another person's. And of course, it doesn't really, the real world doesn't always work that way. For example, when I was coming here from where I was staying in North Sydney area, if I would have headed north, I wouldn't have got here. Someone might have said, well, my point of view is that this program is north. But actually, it wasn't. It was objectively south. And so if you think about it, every time you turn on a GPS, every time you dial someone's number, well, people don't do that, right? You just hit the contact. But every time we make a phone call and the other person's actually there, it turns out that day after day, that's really that person's number. Or the fact that everyone hopefully will agree it's Saturday, or that we are in the Sydney area, or that it's evening and not early morning, and the meaning of English words. I mean, there are millions of things that we all agree on. And if we did not agree on those things, we basically would all be insane, and we could not function. Society as we know it would disintegrate almost instantly, and God knows what would happen to us. So there is such a thing as objectivity, and at the same time there is such a thing as subjectivity. For example, in this room right now, I hope we all agree again that we're in a room. We're not, let's say, on an airplane, and this is Sydney and not Tokyo, and so on and so forth. At the same time, even as all of us agree on, actually, there's almost an endless number of facts about this experience right now, at the same time, each one of us has our own unique experience of this. And that actually is the nature of reality. It is a balance between objectivity and subjectivity. It is a balance between analytically taking things apart and seeing the big picture. And so these are just, I don't even know why I'm talking about this. I guess the idea is that I want to sort of ground us in some level of sanity here about what human cognition is. And so having said that, I'm going to read a Sanskrit verse in the Bhagavad Gita. English is an Indo-European language. And what that means is that we can talk about a sort of a linguistic genealogy, that according to virtually all scholars, if you go back far enough, way back into our proto or prehistory doesn't mean that we were dinosaurs. Prehistory in this sense means that history is taken to be historiography. In other words, documented events that took place in the past. And so historiography means writing down history. Or writing history based on documents, actual proof. Of course, not only written documents, archaeology, and so on and so forth. But when we sort of go past that discernible horizon, there's a certain horizon within which we can talk about historical facts or what probably happened. But after a certain point, things kind of go into an area where we're not sure exactly what happened. So, and yet we have anyway. So Sanskrit language is an Indo-European language. It's intimately related to English. For example, if you were addressing your brother in English, you would say brater. If you were addressing your sister, you would say swasser, father, Peter as in paternal, mater as in maternal, as mother. And there's endless words like that. So it's very sophisticated language. When it was first discovered in Europeans, the first sort of serious European recognition of the power and the sophistication of Sanskrit language came from a great scholar, Sir William Jones, who was head of the Royal Asiatic Society in Calcutta. Around 1790, he gave a speech in which he sort of threw a bomb, which exploded all over the Western world, which is that, think of My Fair Lady. You know all of My Fair Lady? Please tell me you've heard of My Fair Lady. Anyway, the idea is that language is very important. For example, you may see someone that appears to be an educated person, but when they start talking, if their speech is like really awful, then you may change your opinion. Or if someone appears to you to be maybe some ordinary person, but they begin to speak very intelligently, so you change it. So speech is actually important. It's one of the key ways that we try to understand other people by what they say. In any case, Sir William Jones discovered that Sanskrit was intimately connected to English, and virtually all other European languages except Basque, Finnish, and Hungarian, for various historical reasons. What was the problem here? Well, if the languages are related, the whole justification for colonialism was that, and I don't want to bash white people here, but the whole justification was that the European race and the European culture was a special gift to the world from God, and that other people who were not Christian or white were somehow needed to be saved from their lower state of existence. And so when they discovered that these non-white, non-Christian people in India actually had a language much more sophisticated than, as Sir William Jones said, who was a scholar, more sophisticated than ancient Greek, than Latin, not to speak of English, it was a real bomb. Also, so the idea that non-white, non-Christian people actually had an intellectually more sophisticated way of communicating was very shocking. But even more shocking, perhaps, was the fact that because our European languages are so connected to Sanskrit, that therefore somehow we're all related. Because if you go back far enough, this must have been some kind of community or some kind of society. And so we are intimately related to these non-Christian, non-white people. And in 1790, that was about as shocking as it could get. Sort of like the head of the Ku Klux Klan finding out that his great-grandmother was black or something. Anyway, so since then, there has been this attempt to understand what was the relationship, how are we related to this ancient culture? Why are we part of an Indo-European family? Or, for example, the word yoga. We have the word yoga in English, a very close cognate. For example, if you just do one really very minor phonetic shift, if you know phonetics, this is like a piece of cake. If you change the G in yoga to K, you get the word yoke, to connect things, like to yoke things together. And that's actually what yoga means. It means to connect things. So the word yoga survives in English in the word yoke. Also, if you think of the most intimate kind of emotional relationship, conjugal relationship, the jug is a Sanskrit root used. So it's, again, not only the word yoga, but the verbal root of the word yoga, all these things survive in English because of this ancient cultural connection. So, anyway, the Bhagavad Gita is an ancient text. It is composed in Sanskrit. It is called Bhagavat. The word Bhagavat means the Lord, or it means much more than that. It's not just the Lord. It means a lot more. It means really a person who is infinitely attractive to us. And Gita means song. So this is the single most important text, philosophical text in the ancient yoga tradition. Let's say the most important text for practical psychology and even a little bit of yoga technique was the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Ancient Indian schools of thought were sort of grouped in pairs, and so yoga was grouped with Sankhya. And so Sankhya Yoga, which Krishna mentions, means something like philosophy and practice. And so if you know the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, he assumes that you kind of understand the Bhagavad Gita, or you understand Sankhya philosophy, because he doesn't go into a lot of metaphysics of explaining, exactly what is the soul, exactly what is God. He does say, for example, in the Yoga Sutras that Ishvara, that Samadhi Siddhir Ishvara Pranidhanat, that the perfection of Samadhi, if you know the Ashtanga Yoga, Ashta, you know your Spanish, Ocho, the other side of the Pacific Ocean, straight across, Spanish. So Ashtanga means the 8 limbs of yoga, and so anyway, I'll get to the main point. So Bhagavad Gita is explaining the philosophy which people understood for the most part when they practiced yoga. This is the philosophy behind it. What is the soul? What is God? Who are we? Why are we in this world at all? How does this world function? What is our deepest level of psychology, and so on and so forth. So this Bhagavad Gita, the text I'm going to cite now a verse from this text of Bhagavad Gita, which has had an extraordinary impact for thousands of years, basically on everyone that was interested in yoga, its philosophy, and anyone that was interested in the ingenious methods of spiritual life that were developed in South Asia. So the verse that I wanted to read in Sanskrit, I'll give you a little sense of what pure Sanskrit sounds like, is, fortunately, I can enlarge that. Zoom in. Okay, and this is the last chapter of Bhagavad Gita, text 20, and Krishna says, Sarva Bhuteshu Jain Aikam Bhavam Avyayam Ikshate Avibhaktam Vibhakteshu Tadjnanam Vidhi Sattvikam. So this is the worldview of a person who can successfully navigate conflict, who can sustain meaningful relationships, who can be at peace with the world, even at peace with a crazy world. And so you have to be in a certain state of consciousness. And so this is that state. Krishna says that consciousness in which, or by which, in all living beings, not just human, this is not anthropo-chauvinism. This is not the kind of consciousness which validates human beings and kind of brutalizes everyone else. This is not human chauvinism. This is a reverence for life, and for all consciousness. And so what Krishna says here, that there is a state of consciousness by which, or in which, in all living beings, you see one unperishing state of being. And Krishna says, It is undivided in the divided. And of course, I'll explain what this all means. Undivided in the divided. That state of consciousness, that worldview, that understanding is, he calls it sattvikam. You've heard of satsanga. Sat in Sanskrit is actually the, neuter, singular, present participle of the verb to be. So sat actually means being. Literally, it means being. Participle is a verb that acts as a noun. So like a state of being. And satsanga means association of persons who are actually in a real state of existence. Not falsely taking the outer shell to be the self, not judging people by their coverings, but seeing the real person inside. And when you do see the real person inside, yourself and everyone else, the real eternal person, then you understand that actually in the entire universe, there's only one family. I don't mean to denigrate biological families. I mean, I was very fortunate to have a great family. I still do have a good family. And we do have special duties toward our biological family. But ultimately, in a higher spiritual sense, there's only one family in the universe, and we're all related. So, to show why this state of consciousness is important, I will contrast it with, I hope I can just click here and get the next verse. The next verse, which describes consciousness not in goodness, but in passion. The quality of goodness. So I explained sat. So twa in Sanskrit is English ty, like felicity or generosity. So generosity, sorry for all this grammar, hang in there. We are near the University of Sydney, so, it's getting to me. Anyway, so the state of being generous is generosity. The state of being, you got another one there? Yeah, but that's what T means. Generosity, and so on and so forth. Prosperity, the state of being prosperous. So that ty ending in Sanskrit is actually tvam. So sattvam is just the state of being sat, the state of being in true existence. And since your true existence is as an eternal spiritual being, when you understand that, and you're actually in that state of understanding yourself, seeing yourself, doing business as an eternal spiritual being, so to speak, that is called sattva. That is called sattva. And so a consciousness, consciousness in this state sees that everyone actually is related to you. It's a state of perfect empathy. It's a state of perfect, profound empathy with all living beings. Now, even in that state, there are still disagreements, because we all have our unique natures. Fortunately, we are all unique. I mean, who would want to be a carbon copy of anyone else? So each one of us is actually unique, and yet we're all one. And that's, again, the beauty of existence. I was explaining, take what's a healthy relationship? If the two people just merge into each other, that's an emotional disorder called codependence. And if the people are too separate, then it's not really a relationship. And so just like linguistically, you're hearing all these words, and you can actually process all kinds of sounds and all kinds of words and parts of speech, and yet it all is linked together as a single thought or a single statement. And so in relationships, we are individual persons, and yet we are one with other persons. So if you look everywhere in reality, you will find that reality is a balance between individuality and relationship, uniqueness and oneness. And if you take away the oneness, you just get you get the President of the United States. But anyway, sorry, political commentaries here. If you take away the oneness, then it's just bestiality, everyone against everyone. And if you take away the difference, we lose ourselves in the name of unity. And so it's that balance. So I'm going to read now the next one. I mean, I know what it means, but I want to give you the exact Sanskrit. The next verse, Krishna describes worldview, not in goodness, not in virtue, not in sattva, but in passion. And in general, the nature of passion, passion has taken on a positive connotation in English, like, that's my passion, which kind of means I'm really determined, I'm really dedicated to that. So I don't mean that positive sense of passion. I mean here passion in the sense of too excited, selfish, too proud, someone who's just a little too wound up, a little too self-centered. That's what passion means in the Gita. It's just an English translation of a Sanskrit word, rajas. So Krishna's describing worldview in passion, and he says, Prithak tvaina tu jnana. That worldview, or that awareness, that knowledge, in which nana bhavan pratak vidam beti, one sees the difference, different people, different species, different genders, ethnicities, races, nationalities, everything, just all the differences of living beings. And a passionate person, in this somewhat pejorative sense of passion, takes the differences to be fundamental. Like, men and women are just different, or different people from different countries are just different, or different species are just different. People of different ages are just different. Because in passion, because of the selfishness, because of the pride, consciousness loses its transparency. Consciousness becomes clouded, and you cannot see past the body. The fact is, our bodies really are different. We're all the same species and all that, but our bodies are different. We have different abilities. Some of us are more musical. Some of us are more mathematical. Some of us have a higher emotional IQ. Some of us, people are different. Some are better athletes. So our bodies are different ages, different shapes, colors, sizes. So our bodies are different, but that's just like saying our shirts are different, our pants are different, or these women are wearing different dresses. It's superficial. The body is just covering the real self. By the way, I can give you a real kind of a very quick explanation of how you could not possibly be your body. It's not going to happen. And I'll explain why. Because, for example, take your skin. Skin can be an object of erotic desire, or vanity, mirror, mirror on the wall. Spieglein, Spieglein an der Wand. Did anyone hear from Germany? No, that's the original German from Grimm's Fairy Tales. So, when you look in the mirror and you see yourself, the face you are seeing is actually not the face you had 2 weeks ago. First of all, because the skin has replaced itself. The skin is one of the parts of the body that most rapidly recreates itself. So if you touch someone intimately, that's not the same skin you touched 2 weeks ago. At the same time, when you look in the mirror, it's still me. This is me, in a sense. Or, for example, we all say, sometimes language, if you take certain ways of speaking that are virtually universal all over the world, and that people practically at all times and places have spoken that way, then it's very likely it's giving you a picture into our very, very deep psychology. In other words, this is the way we really, really think. And so, one linguistic item here I can present to you for your consideration is that all over the world, for as long as people have been able to do more than grunt, people have made statements like, I was born in such a place. I was personally born in Los Angeles. You were born somewhere. When I was a kid, I did this or that. Now, the important thing is you're saying I. Now, the body is not the same body you had. The body you had as a baby is gone. It's sort of merged back into material nature. This was actually the, apart from all the metaphysical accretions that took place over the centuries, if you look at primitive Buddhism, primitive means like a scholarly term, like in the first period, the first historical period. Doesn't mean they were uncivilized, it just means we're going back to the earliest period. So if you look at the earliest layer of Buddhism, as it occurred in India, practically their key point was in their Shunyavad. Shunya in Sanskrit means empty or void, and so Shunyavad means sort of voidism. Vad at the end means kind of like ism. And so this voidism of the Buddhists was not to say that nothing exists, that there's actually an absolute void, that they explicitly did not mean that. What they meant was that you cannot identify any object in this world, including your own body, which is fixed and always the same. I would often give this example, there was an ancient philosopher, Heraclitus. Honk if you like Heraclitus. He was a pre-Socratic about 2,500 years ago, and Heraclitus is famous for having said that you can't step in the same river twice. Right? Because the river is constantly flowing, new water is coming, the water at the end of the river is going somewhere else, and so you can't step in the same river twice. So you could give another version of that argument, which is very Buddhist, by the way, and you could say that you cannot breathe in the same body twice. You actually cannot breathe in the same body twice because your body is not one fixed object. It's constantly in a state of transition. And they say approximately every 7 years you literally reincarnate. Carne, of course, means flesh. You reincarnate approximately every 7 years, which means divide your age by 7, and that's how many times you've reincarnated in this life. So, do you believe in reincarnation? I hope so, because you've already done it. So the real issue is, does this keep happening when you leave this body? That's actually the real issue. You reincarnate all the time, constantly in this life, but does it keep going on? One thing you can understand from this, before we take that on, is that I said you cannot be your body, because if you look at your deepest psychology, you understand that you were a child, you were an adolescent, or you're an adult, or whatever. That's the way you talk, and that's your deepest understanding of the reality of your existence, that it was you throughout these changes of body. But since the body's constantly changing, your infant body didn't just stretch into your adult body. That's not what happened. So since your body's constantly changing, but you're the same person, logically, you cannot be your body. And if you understand that, and you get in touch with your real self, and you understand everyone else is equally a non-material self, then you can't really hate anyone. Nor could you really try to exploit anyone. So that the idea, if you really see everyone around you as a spiritual being, how could you try to exploit their body in inappropriate ways? How could you try to exploit them financially? Exploit them psychologically by just using them to get attention for yourself? Or how could we exploit them in any way? And so when you see yourself as a spiritual being, you see everyone else that way, you bring a new consciousness to conflict. You understand that although we may disagree, ultimately you are a soul. I may even think that someone, let's say, is really out of touch with their spiritual self, they're really acting inappropriately, and to be spiritual doesn't mean to let yourself be abused, doesn't mean to just accept nonsense in an inappropriate way from anyone. It does mean that even as you carefully select with whom you want to associate, and you carefully, and some people in this world definitely need to be selected and deleted. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we hate anyone. It just means we, have some. We wish them well, but at a distance. So, so we have this fact that we are not the body, and that changes everything. If you actually understand that logically you can't be your body. Now someone could say, well, what if I should not trust my deepest intuition, which tells me that I was a child, I was an adolescent, and so on. At this point, you run the risk of getting into a type of irrational, radical skepticism, which may qualify you to get extra money from the government, because you may unravel. And so, I would like to explain here that if I can just say a word about epistemology, I'll try to make this not too painful. This comes from the Greek word episteme, which means knowledge. So epistemology is the branch of philosophy that basically tries to understand how do you know you know. That's basically it in a nutshell. So, for example, let's say someone is an empirical scientist, and they're studying the physical world, the natural world as they sometimes call it, as if nothing else was natural but material things. But anyway, that's what they're studying. Now, clearly, if you are a scientist and you're studying the natural world, physical world, you are making an unprovable assumption. You cannot study the world seriously unless you're making an empirically unprovable assumption. And that assumption is that there's a real world outside of my mind. Because you could imagine, although don't do it for too long, because again, it's not healthy, but you could imagine that you are some brain in a bottle in the laboratory of some evil genius. That's the example given by Descartes, by the way, French philosopher of the 1600s. And that everything you think you see, like all of us, and everything, is just really within your mind. That's called solipsism. It's a philosophical school which is for solipsis. Anyway, so why is it that scientists are willing to make that leap? I mean, the reason you can't prove that there's real world outside your mind, you can't prove it empirically, is because that would be circular reasoning. I don't want to get into all the technicalities of logic, but it's a total non-starter. Circular reasoning basically means that, I'll do this very quick, conclusion like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. And so the conclusion finds a logical relationship between the two or more premises. So if you give as evidence of a conclusion, the conclusion itself, you're going around in circles. The premise and the conclusion are the same, so you're going around in circles. Like, for example, if I say, well, of course there's a real physical world. This is a real microphone stand. But that's circular because this is a real microphone stand only if there's a real world out there. But since a real world out there is what I'm trying to prove, I can't give as evidence of that there's a real world out there. Like, there's a real world out there. You want proof? There's a real world out there. That's going nowhere. That's circular reasoning. Logically, it fails. And yet, so why is everybody, not only scientists, why are we all willing to assume, as we do, that there's a real world outside of our minds? The reason we do that, and here we'll give a nod to Aristotle, one of the earliest members of the Hare Krishna movement. Right? We take credit for everything. So, anyway, Aristotle was concerned about this because Aristotle saw that someone could threaten the possibility of really knowing anything by pushing you into an infinite regress of proofs. So whatever you say is true, they'll say, prove that, we'll prove the other thing. And so therefore Aristotle said, and other philosophers, for example, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's actually started this movement 500 years ago, who we take as Krishna, he actually gave the same argument, literally, Swatat Pramanyam. Anyway, so what Aristotle said is, it's like an army that's being pushed back and pushed back. The army will be totally routed, totally defeated, unless it takes a stand. So you have to take a stand by saying that something in your understanding is self-evident. Something that you understand to be true, it proves itself, and therefore no one can demand that you go backwards proving it. And so the reason we all accept there's a real world out there is because the experience we have of the world, like right now, the nature, the quality of our experience of the world is such that it proves itself to us that it's actually happening. This is real. I'm not imagining this. And that's really what we're all doing. We're all satisfied with the self-evident nature of a world outside our minds. Now, the point I wanted to make is that we actually live in a bidimensional universe. And you all really believe that. Does anyone here believe that all of us are equal and therefore, that anyone here believe in equality? Or do you think that, one race is better, one person, like only people that think like you should vote or something? So we all believe, but equality is totally not empirical. Take the government, or your system of government in Australia, or America, or virtually almost all modern countries, which is secular democracy in most modern countries. So democracy is based on an assumption that we're equal. And yet empirically, that's nonsense. Right? I mean, we can't all run as fast, we can't all jump as high, we can't all play musical instruments as well, we can't all solve math problems as well. We're not all equally musical. We're not equally empathetic. We're just not equal. There's no test ever devised by cognitive science that can demonstrate that we're all exactly equal in everything. And yet, we, in establishing a system of government, a justice system, a social and cultural system, here in Australia or anywhere else, in other modern countries, we reject all the empirical evidence. We do not base modern systems of government on science. We base them on empirically, almost incomprehensible, metaphysical assumptions. Equality is a metaphysical idea. It's not a physical object. It's not empirically available. It's just a deep understanding we have about the nature of life. So, for example, if you believe there's anything morally wrong with torturing and killing innocent people, if you think there's any problem with that, then you believe in other metaphysical facts. Like, for example, justice, compassion, and so on and so forth. So we could make a long list of the most important things in your life, like love, justice, equality, loyalty. We could make a list of the most important things in your life, and none of them are actually empirical. And none of them can be empirically proved. So either you have to believe and say it, have the guts to say that there's absolutely nothing immoral about torturing and killing any number of innocent people. If you think that statement is false, you believe there's a metaphysical universe. You believe that this universe actually does not merely have a physical dimension, but it has a metaphysical dimension as well, which is real and objective, and actually more important because we subordinate empirical facts to metaphysical facts, namely that we're equal. Now, going back to the point that we all believe there's a real world outside our minds because the nature and quality of the experience. So, just as there are self-evident facts, just as there are self-evident facts about the physical world, there are parallelly self-evident facts about the metaphysical world. Namely that we know, you know that it's wrong to torture and kill innocent people as deeply and profoundly as you know that there's a real world out there. It's not that you know more one than you know the other. When you truly love someone, you know that you love that person as much as you know anything. Or you don't really love that person. And so it turns out there's all these metaphysical facts, which in epistemological, academic philosophical terms, are equally basic, equally foundational, equally qualified to serve as a foundation of a system of knowledge. Just as our understanding there's a real world out there physically is a foundation upon which we can build a system of knowledge called science. And we can also build a system of knowledge called metaphysics based on our equally self-evident, constant experience that there are metaphysical facts in the universe. It's kind of obvious, but somehow a lot of academic philosophers really miss this. Anyway, so what? So if you put all these things together, that you are actually not your body, you're really a conscious being, together, when you combine that with the fact that we actually live in a bi-dimensional universe, the universe has both a physical and a metaphysical dimension, and both are equally real and equally objective, and founded on exactly the same epistemological principle of a self-evident foundational fact. When you understand all that, then you might seriously consider looking into spiritual things. Because the alternative is just to be inconsistent, even hypocritical, and just kind of like not taking life seriously. So, going back to the conflict thing, otherwise you may think that, I have an age-related inability to remember the topic. Not yet. Still hanging in there. So, when you understand all these things, you just look at other people differently. And when there's a conflict, you want to see, you'd rather be a peacemaker than a belligerent, than a gladiator. And so the real hope for the world is that more and more people choose virtue rather than vanity. Like, I'd rather be sexy than virtuous. That's not really the way to go, because by the way, this is not a lecture trying to convince you to never engage in sexual activity. But the point is that if you really understand who you are, then in addition to satisfying the needs of your body, satisfying your own needs are paramount. Is paramount. For example, the hand. You may have the strongest hand in the world. You may be able to crush granite in your bare hand. But still, your hand can't eat. The hand is made in such a way that it cannot directly feed itself. The hand feeds itself by giving the food to the mouth and to the stomach. So the hand feeds itself by giving away the food and not clutching it. Did anyone here from Brazil? No? Anyway, there's a way they catch, or they used to in the old days. They used to catch wild monkeys in Brazil. I'm not condoning catching wild monkeys, but anyway, what they would do is they would build a box with a hole in it and put a banana inside the box. And the hole was precisely measured so that the monkey could put its hand inside the box, grab the banana, but once it grabbed the banana, it couldn't pull its hand out. And the monkey was so attached to the banana, some people are satisfied by very simple things. The monkey was so attached to the banana that it wouldn't let go. And the monkey would just stand there until it got caught. And so, take yourself seriously. Take yourself seriously as a spiritual being. And take other people seriously as spiritual beings. And then your whole approach to life will be different. And the more people there are like that, the more spiritual people there are in the world, the more hope there is of saving the planet. And the more people there are who don't see things this way, then the less hope there is for the planet. It's like, do the math. Finally, one point, and I'll end with this, then you can ask questions, but no refunds. That is that, but where does this all come from? So there are really two logical possibilities. One possibility is there is no source. It just so happens that there's almost an unlimited number of souls in the universe, and they're in bodies, and there's a law of karma, and there's all these laws. Okay, maybe I'll just mention it for a second. There is a culture war going on in the world right now between those who, I would say, frankly, have the common sense to understand that the most sophisticated computers in the world don't build themselves. And you can't just... you could, for example, let the wind blow, the rain falls, seismic activity, and then suddenly, boom, you get this super sophisticated computer out of nothing. What I'm talking about is your body. If you study microbiology, it will just, it's unbelievable. They've now found motors, motors that move things. They found motors in cells, like cells have motors. So when you look at the human body, if you know anything about microbiology, when you look at a supercomputer that makes our best computers look ridiculous, and your best theory is that it just assembled itself. The wind blew, the rain fell, seismic activity, occasional lightning bolts, and that'll do it. That'll produce a supercomputer every time. If that's your best understanding, I wish you well. There's a whole history of the relationship between science and spirituality, or science, or physics and metaphysics. I won't go to it now because I want to kind of wind it up here, but suffice it to say that if you look at the history, Western intellectual history, the conflict between physics and metaphysics, you could say science and religion, or science and those who advocate that consciousness is actually an independent entity, not just a product of matter. This highly politicized debate, which involves very large sums of money in grants, which involves power, it didn't exist before, approximately 1600. There was a time, if you go back, if you look at in South Asia, Indian civilization for thousands of years, everyone had the common sense to understand that because we live in a bidimensional universe, because there is a physical and a metaphysical realm, therefore we need a physical science and metaphysical science, and these are actually partners. They're working together to get a complete understanding of reality. And that was the understanding not only in ancient India, it was the Greco-Roman understanding. No one was so stupid as to think that it'd be like some kind of philosophical imperialist, like, I want to rule everything, I want power over everything. And therefore, and there are times in history when the metaphysicists, say religious people, really trashed science and really even persecuted science. And there are many times, like today, when many academics persecute metaphysics because for some strange reason they dedicate their lives to proving that they will die forever, as if that's a great victory for them. Strange psychology. It's like the monkey with the banana. But the point is, there used to be in the ancient classical world, in ancient India, and even in Europe, during the Renaissance, even during the Renaissance period, and there was actually this partnership, this cooperative spirit that physics and metaphysics have to work together. And then, of course, I won't go into the whole history. What happened, basically, it was the religious side that kind of destroyed the relationship. It involved the Protestant Reformation and the rejection of the Renaissance, the rejection of philosophy, the rejection of science by certain famous Protestant reformers. But in any case, science won. The people doing the natural world, they took over the universities, and just as they had been persecuted and could not get jobs in the best universities because they didn't belong to this or that church, so once there was this revolution, the Age of Reason, the 19th century, and sort of rationalism won, and they kicked all the spiritual stuff out of the university. And so it's very interesting. You have this dialectical battle going back and forth for centuries, and hopefully now we have enough common sense to move on to the synthesis of this dialectic and understand that physics and metaphysics are two necessary parts of knowledge, and they should work together. So in that sense, what is the source of everything? Like, where does this all come from? The universe shows infinite design and infinite art. Look up, well, I don't want to say Google images because you may like Bing, and Google is kind of a weird corporation. But anyway, I'm from California and I went to school near Silicon Valley. So, but the thing is that look at magnified images of sand grains, of which no one can count how many sand grains there are in the world, and they're like jewels. They're different colors. Look at snowflakes. Look at, for example, if you take the sound that crickets make when they rub their legs together, and you establish a ratio between, let's say, a cricket's life and a human life, which is much longer, and you apply that same ratio. By that same ratio, you slow down the sound of a cricket. It actually sounds exactly like Gregorian chants. It sounds like medieval and early Renaissance European sacred music. And so the point I'm making here is that if you look closely enough anywhere in the universe, look at magnified pictures of insects, where George Lucas got the idea for the alien barroom scene in the first Star Wars. And so if you look closely at the universe, you find art everywhere. You find creativity everywhere in the universe that you look deeply enough. You find laws, you find beauty, you find art, you find fantastic, infinite engineering skill everywhere you look. And so to say that, no, it doesn't come from anywhere, it's really trying too hard to be, whatever you're trying to be. So if we can open our minds and open our brains and our hearts to being truly objective and just looking at what's out there and coming to the most rational understanding and not being prejudiced against metaphysics, but actually just being open to the obvious reality of the universe and finding the source of our own existence. And when you find the source of your existence, that's actually the last thing I'll tell you, and then I'm really going to leave you alone. If you read these ancient yoga books, people have these fantastic yoga powers, like they could travel across the universe or they get all these powers. It's really very simple. It's based on a very simple principle, which is the microcosm as macrocosm, and I'll explain that what I mean. The idea is, as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, that the absolute truth or God or whatever name doesn't trigger childhood traumas in you. Is actually present everywhere. The absolute is actually present in everything, and everything is present in the absolute. This is not Newtonian physics. According to Newtonian physics, if I'm in this room, it's not possible in the same relevant sense that the room is present in me. It's just, it's one or the other or neither. But in terms of spiritual metaphysics or spiritual, something can be in something else, and that thing can be in the other object. So you have this thing where the absolute truth is within everything, and everything's within the absolute truth. But when you understand this is what the yogis understood. What that means is that since that absolute truth or Krishna or God or whatever is present in your heart, and that's really what meditation was about, is present in your heart, all the universe and all the universes are present within you. Just as you are present in the universe is equally present in you. And you see this is actually how the whole yoga city thing works. And you see this very clearly in the ancient Vedic fire sacrifice. Fire sacrifice is found all around the world. Read Homer, read the Vedas, read anything. You'll see people did fire sacrifices. And in the Vedic system, they have this very, probably most sophisticated conception. And when you build the fire arena, you actually have to build an arena. There's very precise specifications. And you consciously create a microcosm of the universe. So that you create, for example, different fires in the more elaborate sort of state sacrifices as opposed to more simple domestic sacrifices. And you actually create, and different fires are microcosms of different dimensions of the universe, different places in the universe. And so therefore the great sages, by moving between these fires and chanting certain mantras, actually accessed the universe. And the yogis did something similar. And so whether you can do that today, I don't know. It's keep trying. But that's how the system worked. And so this understanding that everything is within you and you are within everything. So other people you love, they literally are in your heart, and you are literally in their heart. Not only in an emotional sense, that's not just sort of a poetic expression of your emotions. It's actually a fact even in terms of ontology. So anyway, that's basically it. These are the three great tattvas, or the three fundamental principles of reality. The three fundamental principles of reality are souls, us, conscious, unique individual beings, physical nature, which exists in many different universes, and ultimately the source of everything, which we call Krishna, or there are other names. And so when you perfectly understand these three fundamental principles of reality, that's enlightenment. And by meditation, you actually see them. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about seeing the truth. To really know something is to see it. You actually see the reality of it. And so if more and more people actually are on this path, conflict resolution will be a lot easier. So, thank you all very much. And it's really a pleasure. Australia is really a great country, I have to say. And I'm not just saying this so you'll give me money. It's but really, it's a very beautiful country. I'm also from the other Pacific coast. But it's a very beautiful country. I've met so many nice people who are really extraordinary, and there's so many gifts here, so many blessings in this country. And it's really a pleasure to be with you, and I say that very sincerely. So, thank you all, and now if you have any questions, I'll give it a shot.
I'd like to give H.D. Goswami a big round of applause. We might have just a couple of questions, so if you've thought about your question carefully and you're convinced that it might benefit other people, then we have a couple.
Yes, please.
So
No pressure.
the multiverse,
Yes.
you're saying it encompasses the absolute, but then as an individual, our consciousness travels through the multiverse in parallels. So whatever we do in this highway...
Okay, I want to make sure I understand you. Say it one more time.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So the multiverse,
Yes.
that sits above the metaphysics of our individual consciousness.
Let me think. Let me make sure I understand you. Okay, let me go back one step, and then tell me if I'm addressing your concern. The sense that everything is within you
Yeah.
is because Krishna, or the Absolute, is within you. And absent Krishna, it's really just kind of like 4 bloody chambers in there. And so it's the idea, it's not physical space. We're not talking about physical space. And so
it's us progressing as our consciousness, because we see ourselves as individuals.
we are individuals, actually.
Or we see ourselves.
Well, actually, this is an interesting point, because if you look at the history of metaphysics, in every tradition, whether in India or in intellectual Islam, going back 1,000 years, or Christianity, I mean, philosophers, theologians, or Judaism, the real question has been, I think you brought this up, so let me know if I'm on the right track here, that now we experience ourselves as individuals, individual seats of consciousness. So is that who we really are, or is that an illusion?
But I see it as multiple threads that we are experiencing our individualism throughout the whole multiverse. So
Yes.
whatever we do on this lane of this highway, being karma, we can jump across different parallels if we hadn't done this action.
I see what we find in the Bhagavad Gita is that our individuality is eternal, and it's not limiting. We have to be very careful that we don't misidentify our unlimited eternal self as an individual self with the mess we got ourselves in now. These are very different realities. So again, I gave many examples of the oneness and the difference, that we're all one, we're all different. And by the way, this is not just something from Bhagavad Gita or the Indian tradition. You can find many great classical philosophers, like Plotinus, for example, or Philo of Alexandria, great Jewish philosopher around the time of Jesus. This is a whole thread coming down through the entire intellectual and philosophical and mystic history of our civilization, that you can't throw out one or the other. Because let's say you weren't ultimately an individual. Let's say ultimately you weren't an individual, you were just merged into some kind of corporate glowing consciousness. Then the obvious question would be, and this has never been answered satisfactorily from a philosophical standpoint, if we are one glowing corporate consciousness, and we're not individuals, ultimately, how did we get into this situation? Because if there's only one ultimate reality, then there couldn't be illusion, because that would be a second reality. Because pure consciousness and illusion are not the same thing. And what could divide an undivided consciousness? What could divide it? This is a simple thing. It's like, for example, if you have a piece of wood and you want to divide it into two, it takes a lot of energy. Logs don't just divide themselves. And so if everyone is one, which for me would be horrible, because I really like being myself, and I like you being you, because then we can have a relationship, and I find that much more interesting than just merging. And so how could that one consciousness ever be divided? What would divide it? It could not desire to divide itself, because if there's only one, there's no illusion. Why would anyone voluntarily degrade themselves? Why would anyone voluntarily trade happiness for unhappiness, knowledge for illusion? So, individuality, just one more little example. I don't mean to browbeat you here, but one more. If you have say someone has an infection in their hand and it's very painful, one option is cut your hand off. Not the best option, though. The best option is take out the infection, then you have a hand to use. So Also, regarding your point about jumping, to this dimension or that dimension or the multiverse and all that, why would you do that? Or why would I do it? Because ultimately, the quality of our consciousness, our purity or impurity, is really about our motives. For example, you could have two people that say the same words like, "Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you." And one of them really likes you and the other one wants to get your money or wants to get something else from you. And so what is the motive? Because purity of consciousness is purity of motive. So if I wanted to jump to another universe, what would my motive be? Why am I doing that? Is it just like the ultimate cosmic amusement park? Or do I have some loving, pure motive for it?
The oneness could exist in multiple planes, right?
Of course.
Basically saying that there is the oneness linked to yourself, whereas that oneness will be traveling together in the multiverse heading forward.
Yeah, but again, motive. For example, right now I'm here with all of you. And I'm very happy to be here. I think people here are very interesting. I'm really grateful that you came to participate. And I, at this exact moment, I'm not really thinking of jumping anywhere. Because I'm just happy to be with. When you love someone, it doesn't make you want to jump somewhere else. And so what I'm saying is, ultimately, the purity or impurity of our consciousness is about our motives. Why are we doing what we're doing? Is it love? Is it pure love? Is it mixed love? Is it a combination of love and vanity, like I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back, and that's a relationship? What are we really doing?
Existing.
Yeah, stones exist, but would you rather be a stone? And so the point is, if out of pure love, selfless, giving love, you have an excellent reason to jump somewhere, then jump. But what's that reason? Is it that in some other plane you want to help someone? Is it that there's someone in that plane that you love, that you want to help, what are we doing? Because pure souls don't just try to exploit anything. Not their own body, not this universe, not the multiverse, nothing. And so the idea of spiritual life or enlightenment as being kind of like another way to exploit reality, another way to enjoy, another way to really see far out things, it's like better than LSD. That's not pure consciousness. That's just someone who wants to kind of up the ante on their hedonism. And so therefore the real question is, what are we actually doing? And why are we doing it? And what's our goal? My understanding, which I get from the Bhagavad Gita, is that our goal is to have pure, loving relationships with each other and with the source of our existence. And which is infinite, and that love is infinite. Love is like light. For example, let's say you have a flashlight. Do you call it flashlight? In India, they say torch. You actually say torch. There's nothing wrong with saying torch. I'm not being the ugly American here. It's just that, and in America, torch means like when you light a big fire, you carry it around on a stick, through the. So it's just. Anyway, in India, they also say torch. In England, do they say torch? Okay, I'm outvoted here. Don't mess with the Commonwealth. Anyway, so let's say you have a torch. And the torch is inside a room. The light doesn't expand that far. If it's inside a box, even less. But let's say you take that same light and just point it at the universe. That light can travel for, light years. That light can just travel almost infinitely. Because it's like a goldfish. It only grows according to the space it's in. So our love grows according to the object of that love. So when you love the infinite, your love grows infinitely. And when you love people as pure spiritual beings and never try to exploit them, physically, psychologically, financially, in any way, and love means giving, not taking, then everything you do, whether it's going to another universe, which may be something you need to do, or staying in this universe, or going to an eternal realm, Everything you do is motivated by pure love. It's never motivated by taking. It's always motivated by giving. And existing... Well, there was a great song. Anyone know the song Alfie? No? Dionne Warwick? Barbara Streisand? Dating myself? Anyway, so one of the lines... It's really a beautiful song. And one of the lines in that... From the 60s, one of the lines in that song was, without true love, we just exist. So mere existence is not the goal. You couldn't not exist if you wanted to, because you're eternal. You actually cannot end your existence. You know, a person may, tragically terminate the existence of their body, but you just go somewhere else. We do not have the power to terminate our existence. So therefore, existence is a given. We will always exist. The question is, how will you exist?
When you go somewhere else, you're jumping across.
Fine, but I'm jumping across because in pure consciousness I realize the best possible way I could help other souls is by jumping across. And therefore I must know something about the other side. I must have some special information which tells me that I can do the best possible service for others. I can help others in the best way by going over there. And if that's the case, then go. If it's not the case, then why go? It's about service. It's not about the cosmic amusement part. It's actually about service. Yes. Yeah, very good question. How do we learn to love? If we are not... Yes, getting back to our real self, which is our only real happiness. Fortunately, yoga in Sanskrit ultimately means in this context that we're speaking, a spiritual process, like a discipline where you actually practice something. Like you can take piano lessons, or you can do self-realization lessons. Or you can do both, actually, as I did. But, that's what Bhakti Yoga means. For example, I can quote two authorities, Aristotle and Jane Austen. Oh, Jane. Yeah, I'm a big Jane Austen fan. Anyway, Aristotle and his Nicomachean Ethics. And the reason I mention this is because it exactly agrees with what Krishna teaches in the Gita. Aristotle wrote a book on ethics called the Nicomachean Ethics, in which he says that virtue, in other words, doing the right thing, is something you practice. It's something you practice. And do you say in Australia to jumpstart a car? Okay, you understand what I mean. So the point is, if you can try to jumpstart a car all you want, but if there's no engine there, it's not going to happen. Or if the engine's broken. And so you can jumpstart a car, but what are you really doing? You're kind of pushing it to make the things move the way they're supposed to move, and then it just sort of kicks in. And so you can jumpstart your own self-realization. You can jumpstart your own pure love by acting as if you were in the right consciousness. Because that pure consciousness is within you. It's not something outside of you that you have to somehow get. It's in you. Pure consciousness, your pure state of being, is actually there within you. It's just a question of awakening it, or literally discovering it, which is a word Krishna uses. Literally discover, to take the covering off. So that's why it's easy if you just if you practice. For example, when I was young, I studied the piano, played piano, and then I joined the spiritual movement, and it was bye-bye piano, because we were like really kind of severe. So, and then at a certain point, I went back to it, and I found that it was a great. It was really helping my spiritual life. I play mostly Baroque music, which is probably the most spiritual, but also extremely entertaining period. Roughly 1600, 1750, major figures. Bach, Handel, Vivaldi, and so on and so forth, and many others. So, but because I had played piano when I was younger, I could learn. It came back. It's like you never forget how to ride a bicycle. Although I think maybe I did. But anyway, so because you have that pure consciousness within you, Plato talks about this. There's a Platonic dialogue called the Meno where he says that enlightenment is really remembering. Enlightenment is remembering. And you find this exact statement. Krishna says in the Bhagavatam, this amazing text, where there's one very poignant scene where Krishna, or the Lord, is addressing a soul who is suffering, is addressing a suffering soul. And Krishna's come there to help and enlighten that soul. And Krishna asked that soul, Api smarasi mam, do you remember me? Do you remember me? And so enlightenment is remembering. And so act like a pure soul. In other words, if we really love, let's say if you loved Krishna, if you loved God, the source of your existence, then when you woke up in the morning, what would you want to do? You'd want to remember that. Like if you love anyone, let's say you have a crush on someone. People still say that? Have a crush? I have no idea, like, whether I'm still in the same. Anyway. So let's say when someone has a real crush on another person, when you wake up in the morning, guess what you think of? And guess what's the last thing you think of before you go to bed, before you go to sleep, right? Because you can't not think about that person. And so we can practice because that love is within us. That love is actually within us. And so you're not trying to bring it from somewhere else. Like, for example, I do not intrinsically have knowledge of advanced physics, I admit. And so if I was to study advanced physics, it wouldn't be like, remember advanced physics. It would be, oh my God, how do I make sense of all this? So, but in the case of love of Krishna, love of yourself, love of other people, it's already there within you. You have to remember it. You have to discover it. Just remove. And what's the covering? Covering is selfishness, which sometimes take extreme and even criminal forms. So what's covering us is actually selfishness. And so practice being unselfish. That's what Aristotle says. And so in other words, do the right thing. Take up a serious bhakti yoga practice. And because bhakti yoga, the practice, because bhakti means love or devotion. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says of all yogis, the most advanced is the bhakti yogi, because, what's greater than love? How could it be the case that someone, let's say, can do some yoga trick or this or that, and that's more important than pure love? When you really love someone, when you have the extraordinary fortune, the greatest fortune, you find someone you can truly love, not by pretending you don't see what you see, but when you actually meet someone that you can really give your heart to, you can really love, then you know that there's nothing greater than that. How could there be something greater than real love? And so, again, that thing of flashing the light, when you realize there's an infinitely lovable person, that there's actually an infinite being that's infinitely lovable, not just some shining light, but something beautiful, something that loves you infinitely in return. Then your love expands. And when you fall in love, that's when you're happiest, unless you're like brutally rejected or something. But when you fall in love and you're not rejected, that's happiness. And if you discover, imagine falling in love with someone and then discovering, I guess he's not really exactly in every sense the person I thought he or she was. In other words, you fall in love and then you wake up a year later and you realize you're living with a human. So imagine falling in love with someone and then discovering to your surprise the person's actually better than I thought. Not only am I not disappointed, not only was I not deceived, not only was I not DUI, driving under the influence of endorphins and hallucinating all the way, but actually the more I get to know this person, the more I love them. And there's no happiness equal to that. And there's no wisdom equal to that, because when you truly love, that's when you really understand life. And we're talking here about love, not just exploiting someone else or, it feeds my vanity that someone likes me, but real love. And so ultimately, we love someone because they're beautiful, because they're kind, because they love us. That's a big attraction. And so if you find someone that loves you infinitely, that's infinitely attractive, infinitely beautiful, infinitely sensitive, kind, infinitely everything, even musical and athletic. And that's actually what the word Bhagavan means in Bhagavad Gita. Someone who has everything that you love, everything you want in a person, and there's a person who has all those things infinitely. And that's God. And therefore, that being the case, there's no good reason not to look into this, unless you just don't want to be, to use the lingo, decentered. Because someone can be a philosophical theist and a psychological atheist. In other words, I can say, well, yeah, I believe in God, but then psychologically, I much prefer to be the life of the party. I want to be the center of everything. I want God, but in very small doses. Because my life is really just about me, and I love nothing more than being the center. I want to be loved. I want everyone to give me attention, and therefore, obviously, very small doses. Because if I take God in larger doses, I'll be decentered. I won't be the center of reality anymore. I hate to be the one to break it to anyone who's thinking that way, but none of us is actually the center of reality. And if you need support right now, let us know, and we're here for you. Is that but actually none of us. And so if psychologically I am the center of my reality, that kind of very curious way of talking nowadays, my reality. So if I am psychologically the center of my reality, I'm basically nuts. Because I'm not the center of reality. I am operating under a massive delusion about reality. And when we really understand what is the center, and we're happy to be humble, which is, that's a tough one, but then we discover reality, because the more I'm filled with myself, the less room there is in my head for reality. And actually, all of reality is more interesting than just my vanity. It actually is much more interesting, much more entertaining, much more fulfilling. So this is spiritual life. This is Bhakti Yoga. So in answer to your question, practice. It's like at a certain point, I discovered this incredibly beautiful music, which is Western music, and it was very much composed for God. Bach, after every piece, he wrote to the glory of God and the recreation of man. Same thing. I mean, all my favorite composers were deeply spiritual, although they weren't in the Krishna tradition, but they were very serious, profound people who. Last thing, I promise, and that is, you find in the Bhagavad Gita the same philosophy you find in Europe, let's say in the 1600s, about the philosophy of art. The philosophy of art. In Europe, there was a belief, let's say in the 1600s, perhaps earlier, that there was a patron saint of artists. And I mean visual artists, poets, composers of music, just all the artists, that they had a patron saint who was Saint Cecile, this goddess, or this lady saint, Saint Cecile. And so they would have festivals in Europe in honor of Saint Cecile, in which all the greatest composers, the greatest poets, just the greatest artists would get together and have their own artist festival. And anyway, there was a person, Henry Purcell, is generally considered to be the greatest composer of the 1600s in England, in Britain. And he died very young, unfortunately, tragic. But twice he was asked to compose music for the greatest poets in England for this celebration, to honor the patron saint of the artist, Saint Cecile. And so the words are very interesting. If you look at those songs, there's this fantastic music that no one buys. But anyway, if you look at this, the words are, the idea is that when the composer is composing music, his or her music, that the music is actually a gift from heaven. Mozart, by the way, saw it that way. The music is actually a gift from heaven. And so the artist, whatever kind of art, takes this gift and fashions it as a service to God and humanity, works with it, and then offers it back to its source. So this idea of receiving something, offering it back to its source in an act of love and devotion and gratitude is found in the Bhagavad Gita. Same philosophy. Krishna says in the Gita, Evam Pravartitam Chakra, which literally means, it's almost never translated literally, that there is a wheel that has been made to turn. A wheel, chakra. A wheel has been made to turn. It also means a cycle. And Nanuvarti Atihaja, one who does not keep the wheel turning, is actually living, their life is an offense to the universe. Avram Pavartitam Chakram, Nanuvarti Adihaja, Agaira Indriya. And so what does it mean to keep the wheel turning? It means the wheel is that we are constantly receiving gifts, the gift of life, the gift of consciousness, the gift of love, the gift of everything. And we receive these gifts and offer them back. There's that great George Harrison song, Isn't It a Pity, where he says, forgetting to give back, isn't it a pity? Same idea. And so by offering back the gifts in the form of art, in the form of honest work, in the form of loving your family, in the form of loving your friends, serving others, protecting other life forms, not only humans, in all these ways we're giving back, and that creates a cycle, that creates a wheel which is turning. The wheel of receiving and giving back, receiving and giving back. And one offends the universe, one offends everything if you receive and just grab onto it and run away with it and don't give back to others and don't give back to the source. In other words, predatory capitalism. So that's the idea. You find it in this beautiful sort of late Renaissance, early modern philosophy of art in Europe. You find it in the Bhagavad Gita. You find it everywhere. Keep the wheel turning. Receive and give back. And that's Bhakti Yoga, really. So, thank you all very much. And
thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did at the front here. I'd like to invite our second special guest, Sri Prahlad, to lead a little kirtan, in case you weren't hungry enough. You'll be hungry after.
I met Sri Prahlad when he was 12 years old. The first I came to Australia 30 years ago, and Sri Prahlad, he wrote a song which became a hit, because there was a time when he actually had a hit song and a recording contract when he was 12 years old, or 11. 12, because there were Hare Krishnas in the Soviet Union who were being persecuted, and they were being persecuted and imprisoned by the Soviet government because they were chanting Hare Krishna. And at the age of 12, he spontaneously wrote a song to Gorbachev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at that time, saying, "Please let them go, let these people go." And it became a hit, and that was when he was 12 years old. So here he is now.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful talk. H.D.Goswami will be speaking again on Tuesday, 14th of November at Govinda's ashram, starting at 7 p.m. We'll have some kirtan there as well. So Govinda's ashram's in Darlinghurst, corner of Darlinghurst Road and Liverpool Street. Wednesday. Did I say Tuesday? Okay. Wednesday, 14th of November.
Tuesday still?
Oh.
And
Wednesday, 14th of November, Darlinghurst, Govinda's ashram. Okay. Okay, so we'll start with some prayers to the spiritual teachers. Those of you who know these prayers, you're welcome to join in with us. Those of you who don't, just soak up the transcendental vibrations, and then we'll sing the Maha Mantra and invite everyone to join in the singing, call and response, the words for the Maha Mantra there on the board. Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Asatya Vishatarine Shri Krishna Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Radha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Let's sing that again, all together, one voice. Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Together once again, one high. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, And again, one voice. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Let's sing together. One by